Hello. It is Wednesday, my dudes. It's Wednesday morning. Pre-employment podcast on this one. Normally I don't record these in the morning, but I have my long drive later today, and I just not in the mood to record a long one, so I figured I'll do a short one at the beginning. Also just sitting here, trying to figure out a topic, and this morning I've been, non-stop thinking about some ideas that I want to innovate on, like brine mining, or, list goes on, but, and I've just been thinking about, how the heck do I do these things? How do I motivate myself? And then it clicked. I realized, one, I don't need to motivate myself necessarily to do it. I just need to motivate people to do it. And two, how do you motivate people to do it? So, today I want to talk about a concept that's going to sound weird on paper. It's weird seeing this much traffic this early in the morning. Actually, I could probably turn the blinker off. It's just going to be annoying. But yeah, today the topic is going to be a bit strange. It's going to be necessity and how to use it. There was a car there. I'm getting honked at. But yeah, necessity and how to use it. Right there. This vehicle needs to move. I literally can't turn. I'm going up and around. I can make a U-turn up here. Benefits of driving in the morning. Normally it's go, go, go. It's just this particular morning. I had a bunch of cars on the road because Wednesday is the most traversed day of the week, if you didn't know that. The most travel for the work week happens on Wednesdays. And I think it has something to do with how businesses are structured, of in office days versus non-in-office days. But they make it a necessity that you need to be there on Wednesdays. So, okay. So necessity and how it works. Necessity and how to make it work for you. Necessity and how to use it. Whatever I said it was. But I'm going to talk about necessity. What is necessity? I always like to start with a definition. Necessity, or needing something, is a perceived or actual requirement for continued life, for continued process X, for continued anything that you can put at the end of this sentence. To continue in something, it has certain needs, and those needs are necessities. I know I'm using the word in the word. It has certain requirements that must be met in order to continue. That is a necessity. So life is the most obvious example. We have physical needs, our body does. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to poop. Eat, sleep, poop. We need shelter of some kind. We have several needs that must be fulfilled in order to survive as a human being. And those are necessities. Those needs are necessities. Those requirements that must be fulfilled are necessities. And oftentimes, you even take the most lazy person in the world, and they will still probably not die of starvation. Or probably, maybe not the most lazy person, but lazy people, even on your lazy day, if you're hungry, you're going to eat. It's one of those, and this is, of course, assuming that you have access to food. Not the entire world does. It's pretty sad. But the food crisis has been going slowly down across the globe, which is good news, I'd say. But necessities are things that, for the purpose of humans, are things that are required, are essential to our continued existence physically on this earth. But there's more than just that. There's also mental necessities too. People need a sense of community, and if they don't have that, then they often spiral into their own. People can spiral in different ways, but it usually ends up resulting in idolizing yourself, or elevating yourself pathologically, or doing things solely for yourself. You don't seek out new community after you hit a certain threshold. And it's stuff like that where it's a bit crazy. And I can pick up a few examples. I don't know if I want to get into it. I will. This one's fun. Well, it's not fun, but it's very strange. I was talking with a friend of mine he's a fire marshal, and because of his position, he gets certain access to information to cases, not criminal. Well, I guess it is technically a criminal case, but certain cases that involve flame hazards, and it gets the inside scoop. So recently, and by recent I mean a couple months ago, there was this guy. This guy was the ballistics specialist for the U.S. government. Specifically the ballistic test dummy specialist. This was the guy you went to if you needed a anatomically correct model of a human being made. Both in terms of forces and texture and feeling, but also in terms of appearance. This was the guy for that. And when COVID happened, he had a bunch of free time on his hand. Went a little stir crazy. But he had this skill set. And a few months ago, there was a big power outage up in the county he lived in. And shortly after, he was found dead in his home. He killed himself. Here's where the privileged information comes in. I saw pictures of the scene, not of him, but of his house, and it's the strangest thing. He designed and built for himself anatomically correct women. They're not women, they're dolls, but full-sized models there was 6 or 7 women, and they all had power cords, because you could plug them in, and they could move, and they could talk to you, and they were, for all intents and purposes, anatomically correct models of what a human should be. Now, they're made of, polymers and latex and rubber and whatever else they actually use. I'm just generalizing. But, he had a house full of these fake women. And when the power went out, they stopped talking because he no longer, could power them. And because this is me inferencing, because he was trapped in his bubble, and he had no community from the sound of it, he found community and made his own community, and then when that community left him, he had no hope, and that's what led him to end his life. By the way, I looked at these pictures. Oh my gosh, if you had a shot of these women from the neck down, you could not tell they were fake. And again, I'm going to call them women. They're models, they're dolls, but you could not tell. And it was weird how accurate they looked. You can only really see it in the face because of his poor makeup job. But it was in the eyes. But still, oh my gosh, they were so accurate. It's creepy how accurate they were. But either way, for that guy, that was his necessity. That was his community. That was his mental necessity. And I think I've beaten the topic enough of needs as an examples. Let's talk about how you can use them for your good, your benefit, in general. So, you are a deceptive person, and I mean this in the best way possible. You are able to deceive and convince yourself and often others that certain things are required to continue. Now that there are true statements in that, but there are very much so often when we do this, certain things that are not actually required in order to continue whatever we are doing. But we convince ourselves and others that they are necessities, that they are required. And because they are required in our mental head psychology, we do them, or we are more likely to do them. Things that are optional are optional. We don't do things that are optional as often as we do things that are necessary and required. If it is a necessity, you will probably do it. Or you don't move forward on whatever you're doing. You'll find yourself in a rut, and whatever work or project you're on will just stop if you don't do what you consider necessities. No one does all the optionals first. Or some people do, maybe. But you do the necessities first. So, I guess this is a pep talk about psychology, but whenever you label something, and this is all founded in labels, whenever you label something a necessity, it's more likely to get done. So you can use this to your advantage in your day-to-day life to get stuff done, as well as to convince others to get stuff done. An example of this, let's see, what would be a good example? Necessity. So, eat, sleep, poop, shelter. Those are actual necessities for a physical human being. And it's more generalized than that. Like, exercise is a necessity in some sense. But that's actually one that we convince ourselves of pretty often. So, exercise is a good thing. You should exercise. But exercise is, for all intents and purposes, if I don't exercise tomorrow, I'm not going to die in 3 days, ideally. Like, it's not like no water, you know. If I don't exercise a month from now, I might gain some weight, and I might get weaker, but I'm not going to necessarily die from that, if that makes sense. Just the process of living burns plenty of calories, and is able to, you know, your body is pretty miraculous in the sense that you will be kept in shape. Had to stop suddenly. Jeez. Glad I could stop. It's pretty wet outside. Yeah, so, and exercise is probably not the best example because it is a good thing, but it's a good thing that we have convinced ourselves is a necessity for life. Yes, you need to have some activity, but take someone like, take Stephen Hawking, for example. He's no longer with us, but he was confined to a chair for several years towards the end of his life. He couldn't really exercise. He could move his wrist, and that was about it, and his eyes. Now, his lack of exercise did not kill him immediately or in any appreciable amount of time from when he stopped exercising. It's a good thing, but it's not necessarily a necessity. Or more so, you can go years without it and still be fine. Not fine, but you could still be alive. So we'll label exercise as not a necessity for human life. Yet, so many people convince themselves it is, and they prioritize it as such. People will not eat or sleep until they finish their exercise. And if they don't get to it, maybe they miss a meal. Like, they're trading priorities is what they're doing in this. But because they're so convinced it's a necessity, they will sacrifice actual necessities in order to meet this necessity because they prioritize it more, even though it's not even a true physical necessity. It's a mental necessity of, I think I need to exercise in order to continue living. And I'm using that as an example. I can pull out another one if you want. But that is a prime example of the psychology behind motivating yourself to do something by calling it a necessity. And the fact that you can go years without exercising and people convince themselves to do it every day, like, you know, that's a big evidence for this. Now to say, I exercise, it's a good thing. People exercise usually to pursue a goal, or a good goal, and they might not necessarily consider it a necessity, but more like an optional step in the process to reach their goal. But it is still a necessity for them in some semblance. Another example, I guess, would probably be if you're ever working on a team, or a group project, or even, let's say you're doing homework, and you're a highly motivated individual, or just an averagely motivated individual, you might consider in your mind that it is a necessity that you spend X amount of time on a project or piece of paper or homework assignment, whatever you have, you must spend X amount of time to get this done in order to pass, achieve your goals, succeed, whatever your measure of success is, criteria is. And that's not necessarily true. Like, if you're, let's say with college is a good example. If your goal is to pass your classes, awesome. What's it take to pass the class? Well, in my major, it took C minuses to pass classes. If you got a D, you failed it, and you had to retake it. So, C minus is the passing point. If my goal is to pass classes, I can spend 20 hours a week on homework for a single class, and I might still not get it. I had that happen a lot, actually, my junior year, my senior year and junior year, where I had classes that were assigning me 20-hour homework assignments. And I say 20 hours. They weren't actually 20 hours, but I would put 20 hours towards them a week. And often, I wouldn't even finish them. I just had a cutoff of, like, no weekly homework assignment is going to take more than 20 hours of my week. And that was my mental cutoff. But they necessarily, to complete them, they would have needed to. Actually, like, that's a physical constraint. Like, to complete those assignments without additional help, I would have needed to spend more physical time working on them. But because I had this 20-hour cutoff, I didn't. And so, I was still able to submit them, and I was still able to pass my classes. It's funny that, like, because I had this necessity of, like, oh, I need to do homework to pass my classes, it doesn't necessarily say what quality I need to do. I could have spent 4 hours on those assignments, got through everything I could have done, and then on the stuff I didn't understand or the stuff that I was hitting my head against the wall trying to work through, I probably could have skipped them and still passed the class. Like, they weren't actually necessities, but I convinced myself that they were, and so I would work to a great end to achieve them. And that's kind of what I mean, is we can convince ourselves of things, we can label them necessities, and then we will make great sacrifices in order to achieve them. Let's see, another example, or let's talk about another way to make this work for you. So, you can convince other people that certain things are necessities, and they are much more likely to do them. Let's see. How to put it. If you're a parent, let's say you're a parent of a preteen or a teenager, and that teenager wants to go hang out with their friends. You can put a necessity on top of that requirement, on top of that condition, to say, hey, you can hang out with your friends, but before you do, you need to go do your laundry. Suddenly, you have this convinced behavior that you are requiring of them. Now, physically speaking, do they actually need to do their laundry to hang out with their friends? Probably not, especially if they have a car or something, and they can it's neighborhood friends, they can walk there themselves. They don't actually need to do their laundry to hang out with their friends. Now, in terms of obedience, this is a command they need to if they want to be obedient. Or also, from terms of the requirement of the obedience, they need to in order to hang out with their friends. Like, it's a prerequisite in their mind that you have convinced and told them of that needs to happen before they do it. Otherwise, they face consequences. You should punish your kids if they don't do what you say, in that sense. Here, you can do this good thing, but you gotta do this hard thing first. And if you don't do this hard thing, you're not gonna get this good thing. And if you do the good thing without doing the hard thing, then you're gonna get a harder thing coming your way. Does that make sense? You teach them priorities in that way. But that is a forced external necessity example. And that's pretty practical, like that's day to day. Another example would be if you're ever, so I started one of these this way, if you're ever working on a project in a team, have someone, maybe agree upon it, maybe not, but have someone write out a list of goals or the process to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve in your team setting. Just humor me with that. Like put the process on paper. Tell them to spend between 5 minutes and half an hour doing it. Just cursory, like, okay, here's the steps, here's what we're doing, here's the next step, what do we need to do in between them? And you catch it. What did we need? What do we need to do to get from this step to the next step? And suddenly you have this process chain with requirements and necessities. And you probably don't need to do everything in between those steps to get from one to the other. Like, actually. But because it's been laid out in some way, in some official capacity, you do need to do them that way. Otherwise, the process won't move forward. With few exceptions, but there are exceptions, of course. Like, if you have step A, B, and C, and there's goals 1, 2, 3, and you have steps A, B, and C between each of those goals. So A is you have task A, B, and C between goal 1 and goal 2. To get the goal 2, from I've written this out standpoint, I need to accomplish A, B, and C to progress to goal 2 before I get to the next step. Well, what might actually be true is you only need to do goal A, and you can push off B and C to get the goal 2, and then once you get the goal 2, you can circle back and do it. Like, that's what's actual versus what is, mentally speaking, psychologically speaking, necessity, what is required. And it all depends on how someone lays it out, and if they can convince their group this is the way. This is the way. This is the way. Little Mandalorian joke. Anyway. So that's how you can use this to your mental, psychological benefit. So an example of this, I mentioned Wednesdays are the most traveled days of the week for work. Even though people can do their jobs, they have the capability to do their jobs remotely, especially in work that sells intellectual property. So my job, we do both. We sell designs and plans, and we sell selections, but we also sell physical equipment that gets shipped to a customer and is installed. Like, we sell physical things. This entire job cannot be done, well, my job can, but this entire process cannot be done from a desk. Like, there needs to be boots on the ground at some point, working on the machine and installing the machine. But people like me in the middle, for the most part, can stay completely remote in terms of to do our jobs. Like, I don't need to go into the office to do my job. But, and my company's like this, Mondays and Wednesdays are a mandatory, required, necessary in-office day. And it's not actually a necessity. I can do my job without doing this. But in order to fulfill what my boss has told me in company policy, in order to keep my job, I necessarily need to show up in person on Wednesdays. And as you go up in the job, people get around this. Like, I have coworkers who only come in once a week, so they come in on Mondays, and they don't show up on Wednesdays. And they've worked it out in some back-end deals with their bosses to let them do that. Or I have people who, there's a guy on my team, well, not my team, but a guy in my team that I'm a part of, who is fully remote, and he'll only come in like once a month, pretty much, just to maintain status quo and deal with whatever in-person things he needs to. Again, he doesn't have many in-person needs, but the ones he does show up for once a month. And so, stuff like that, he can do his job completely remotely, pretty much. And even though the company needs him to be in person, they require him to be in person, he's been there for over, 17, 18 years. And he said, I know how to do my job better than anyone else in the company. I don't need to be there. Or better than anyone else in this office. I don't actually need to be there to do my job, and I'd prefer not to be. And, he might have some medical stuff too, I don't know. But he was convincing enough that this necessity is no longer forced upon him, even though it is still a company-wide policy and a need and necessity for all his coworkers. Um, so that's why I'm saying this is psychological. He doesn't actually need to show up in the office, but all of his coworkers do. And it's simply because it's a forced necessity that is not necessarily required to do your job. Although it falls within the scope of your job, so it's kind of semantics at that point. Is it required? Well, yes, it's required by company policy, so it is necessary. But to actually do the content portion of your job, you don't need to be in person, if that makes sense. So that's a real world example. I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit, but that's a real world example that I deal with. Not that I deal with it, but I'm driving to work right now, and it's a Wednesday morning. 6:42 a.m. So I'm actually a little bit later than I like to be. I like to get there at 6:30, so I'm the first person. Mainly because when you're the first person to get there, you can also be the first person to leave. And when you're the first person to leave, no one can really say, like, oh, he's leaving early, because they have no idea when I got there, because they weren't there. Now, I'm pretty honest, so I work my 8 hours, and if I take lunch, I factor that in. But it lets me, like, if I get there at 6:30 and I work for lunch, I can leave at 2:30, and that's not a typical thing people do in an office setting. But I'm paid salary, so when it's slow and I don't have much work piled up, I'll leave on time, but I'm still there for the 8 hours, which isn't necessarily. I watched a video recently by How Money Works. I like their content. They give good perspective, but they talked about how 9-to-5 jobs should be going the way of the dinos. 9-to-5 jobs makes sense for factory workers, and they were developed 100 years ago because of labor unions, when almost all jobs looked like manual labor of some sort, or physical, factory labor. Oh, is this not going to open for me? I'm pulling into the parking garage. Ah, man. I gotta use my swipe. Alright. Oh, I'm in reverse still. Alright. Moving up the garage. Cool. So I'm almost to work. As a heads up. So I'll be ending this shortly. But yeah, so like 9-to-5 jobs, for example, are not a necessity for most salaried positions. What he recommends is you have a salaried position and you require your employees to do their jobs. However long or little it takes them to do their jobs, that's up to them. But as long as they do their jobs and fulfill actual requirements of them, then you don't mandate how many hours they're in or not. As long as you're getting the same amount of work that you would from a previous 9-to-5 employee of the same role. And I would love that. I would love that was the case. But it's not. And maybe I would only love it in this season, because what ends up happening is companies will dump more work on their employees. That's just what's going to happen. So what might have been maybe, let's say, 30 hours of work in a 40-hour work week, so I'm putzing around, twiddling my thumbs for a little bit, suddenly I don't have a time associated with this. So I can actually be doing 30 hours of work, or they could dump 60 hours of work, and because it's in the scope of your salary, you need to get your job done, they'll force me to do it. So there's benefits and not benefits. But at least with a salaried position, the average work week is 40, and you might be able to extend that for a project or two, or a week or two. But if that's a recurring thing, then you can cut back, and you should, as long as you document your work well, you can say, like, hey, this has been elevated for 2 or 3 weeks of I need to work 20 hours over 40, need to work 60 hours. I'm going to go back to working 40 hours, and whatever doesn't get done is just not going to get done and get pushed towards the future. And if you want it to get done, I recommend you hire an additional employee, because there's too much work. Now, that might get you fired, but if you do it tactfully, people are pretty reasonable, and I would recommend something like that. Anyway, thanks for listening to the 26th Pep Talk on necessity, and whatever I said the title is going to be. Necessity and how to use it, I think, is what I'm going to stick with. So thanks for listening. I hope this was a good instructional, practical, psychological experiment and lesson that you can use in your everyday to convince yourself to do things. Make something a necessity in your life, and you'll probably get it done if you're struggling to find motivation to do things. So, thanks for listening. Enjoy your Wednesday. Goodbye.